Recording, Gary. There we go.
Right there.
There it is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll save any comments that might get us banned till the end.
Well, I'll make it on Twitter anyway.
Uh,
mean X.
Yeah, X.
X.
There was a big discussion on the radio the other day as to are you Xing now or Twittering? Which are we doing?
So the bird's gone, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have any mascot for Twitter.
And he got a lawsuit about it too. He didn't ask the building owner if he could put an X on his building.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Oh, so what national day of celebration do you enjoy the most, and what makes it so special?
Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving for us, yes.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I went back downtown at Methodist, and there's one of the I don't know, he's somebody in finance, but the hobby, he's from Ethiopia, and he's the one I've talked to you about. He's a Coptic Christian, and you know, sometimes we have different. They celebrate Christmas a couple weeks after us, and Easter's a different date, but they still celebrate it. And so anyway, so he was. Went over and talked to him. He's not in every day. I mean, everybody down there is kind of on a different schedule, but so we were talking, and he said, "Yeah, this weekend's our New Year." And I said, "Well, Happy New Year." And then so I said, "So that's kind of like the Jewish New Year's is this weekend too, Rosh Hashanah." Yeah. So so we got talking about that. I mean, we talked about a lot of things off and on, different things, and but he was really excited about the Ethiopian, how they celebrate New Year, and he showed me some pictures. And the Ethiopian flag actually has that's green or red and yellow, green or something like that. And they said it's a rainbow, and with them it's a rainbow flag because it does is a direct reference to the rainbow after the flood. And I mean, so interesting. He showed me some picture. He was so excited. It's kind of like it was like a little kid when they showed me these pictures from Ethiopia and how they celebrate, and with the flowers and the pageantry, and yeah, because they have a 13-month calendar, so every month in their calendar is 30 days, and then this New Year, which starts this weekend, just picks up the extra days of the 360. So it's just like a 5-day month for them. But
they have a practice that they do this week too that's called Tashlik. Have you heard of that?
No, I
Where
didn't.
they take bread and they go to running water, whether it be a river or an ocean, and they tear the bread up into pieces, and that represents all their sins, and they repeat passages out of Micah, and throw all their sins into the water, and they're gone.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to talk to him too, because I shared him that with him that clip about how you could actually counted the 3 days from Christ's death to his resurrection.
Yeah.
And he said he watched it, and he said, "Well, yeah, that's interesting, but we believe with it when Christ was on the cross and and died, and then it went dark." He said, in that period of time, 3 days passed. We didn't have time to talk about all that, but he that's kind of how they account for it. So anyway, It's
Bit of magic.
yeah. Well, I mean, something God could do. So, but hey, Tony.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, Tony.
Hi, Tony.
So, which traditions in your family have a spiritual significance for you?
Well, I'm old enough that our family has a lot of traditions, so I mean, I don't know how if it continues with later on in our lives with our kids or what, but my grandfather, was one that on my mother's side, whether it be Christmas, Thanksgiving, even our own birthdays, he read from the Bible and prayed, and so there was a lot of spiritual significance to all our get-togethers, family-wise. We've
Wow.
kind of continued that on our side, but I'm not telling you that I can see it in the future.
Yeah. Wow. Awesome. Anyone else?
We on Thanksgiving, we'll go around and there's 30, 35 of us typically, and we'll just all hold hands and go around and say what we're thankful for. And that comes out in a very nice spiritual fashion.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool.
There's a genuine completeness too when you do that. I've always, if we would walk away and not do that, I would feel like we left something out.
Right.
Yeah.
So for us on Christmas Day, every morning the kids stop halfway down the stairs.
Yeah.
And we've done that even since they've left and become their own families, because they come here and stay that night. And they sit on the stairs and read Luke 2.
Oh,
Yeah.
And they read, each read a different section of it. And it's become really, really cool. And the maturity of the kids have changed over time. At first it was difficult to read. First we read it to them, and then it was difficult for them to read, and they got the words wrong. And then it was, when they were smarter than everybody, it was funny. And then in the last few years, it's become pretty serious and somber. It's been really neat.
Cool.
So any of you that know my wife well know she's a huge Peanuts fan. So
What?
yeah. So we've always as a family watched Charlie Brown Christmas, and
Yeah.
the reading at the end.
I thought you were going to tell me your tree didn't look really good.
Those are the only ornaments on the tree, are Peanuts ornaments.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Wow.
but I'm amazed that show continues to be aired,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell
I
you what
watched Debbie
Christmas
Loves
is
It.
all
We never
about,
missed
Charlie
it.
Brown.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
Lights, please.
Yep.
yeah.
And the significance of
Dropping
Linus
that
dropping
blanket.
dropping his blanket. Yep.
Well, yeah. No, have to watch that again. All right, Rick's not here. I guess I'll read this. You may recall from a couple weeks ago that the Jews killed a lot of people, 75,000 plus, in the month of Adar on the 13th and 14th, including the sons of Haman. So it's important to note that the Jews were not the aggressors. All those individuals, including the sons of Haman, attacked the Jews, and the Jews were, in fact, defending themselves. The Jews killed those that were coming against them. So I just wanted to make that clear, is that they weren't going out seeking out these people, but these people did come against them. So Purim is still celebrated by sending gifts of food to friends and loved ones. The book of Esther in its entirety is read in the synagogue on Purim. During that reading, noisemakers are used. People cheer at Mordecai's name and boo and hiss at Haman's. The Talmud describes drinking and celebrating on Purim until one can no longer tell the difference between Mordecai be blessed and Haman be cursed. That's a pretty wild celebration, I guess. It is a holiday that the Jews continue to celebrate as a sign that they will never be destroyed as a people. The significance of the holiday and the message of Esther's story were not lost on the Nazis, who would kill on the spot any Jew in prison camps possessing a copy of the Book of Esther. I never heard that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yet the incarcerated Jews wrote copies of it from memory. The story of Esther was most precious to the Jews facing mass death, because in it they found assurance and hope that they, not their enemy, would triumph against all expectation. Throughout the history of the Book of Esther has been read not as an isolated episode in Jewish history, but as symbolizing the final salvation of God's people at the end of time. And you got here just in time, Rick. He's connecting.
That's timing, Rick. Way to go.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, Rick, I just read your part. He's still not on. That's okay.
Wake up, Rick.
Well, this is your part, Steve.
All right. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as a time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as a month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the pur, that is, the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his son would be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pur, because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them. The Jews took it upon themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year, in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, and in every province and in every city. And these days of Purim should never cease to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of them die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes, words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai to which the king had raised him, are they not written in the book of the annals of the king of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and he held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews.
Thanks, Steve. So, any initial comments or thoughts on this, on the book of Esther?
Well, it makes me wonder if Xerxes got a little bit concerned about the power of the Jewish people inside his kingdom.
What? Why is that?
Because they stood up and killed 75,000 people. I mean,
Well,
that's that similar act is where the Jews got in trouble before in different kingdoms, because they started becoming too large and
Powerful.
concerning. Yeah.
Well, I mean, those people attacked the Jews based on Haman's original edict.
Right, but that would have been, it's like yesterday Haman was the guy, and today Mordecai's the guy. But
Right.
Haman went bad on Xerxes, and so you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's also interesting in this story on how there's I guess at least 3 that I can recall, including Esther, where although the Jews have been driven out of their homeland or been overcome and taken out by other civilizations, and even though they were prisoners, they might have been the enemy, or they were slaves. Somehow 3 different people just kind of rose up from out of nowhere and became very high up in their enemies, in their captors' kingdoms. I mean, you got Daniel, you got Joseph and Esther that I can think of right offhand.
It's interesting. I watched Schindler's List last week, and it reminds me of Esther. Schindler was not a Jew, and for some reason he starts reaching out to the Jewish people. Well, it's not for some reason, it's because it was free labor, basically. And his bookkeeper becomes the Mordecai of the story of Esther. And it's really interesting. He himself doesn't really, he's like Xerxes. He doesn't really, love the Jewish people, other than he's doing all this work and making all this money for him. And he doesn't live a good life at all. Schindler was not a real good guy, but ultimately he started to care for the Jewish people because he saw, what the Nazis were doing. But there's a lot of similarities between Esther and Schindler's List, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's like a retelling of the same story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also interesting as I some of the commentaries, and I mean, several of them mentioned that during the what's that period between the New Testament and the Old Testament, whatever that period was, but during that time, the Greeks, and I think it's the LXX translation, where they translated the Hebrew into Greek. Now, when the Greeks were translating this book, they added several additional chapters so that Mordecai would be more the hero rather than sharing the title with Esther. So, and the Greeks also took it, and they, for both Mordecai and Esther, they said, well, it's obviously they must have been praying and had sacrifices and things to God during this time, and so that they got their translations include some of that stuff in their book. But
Did it say why they gave more credit to Mordecai than Esther? Because the Greeks had female gods and male gods, and
but still, it was still a male-dominated society. So yeah, I think in Esther's mentioned just a few more times than Mordecai, but in the Greek version, Mordecai's mentioned more often than Esther. Of course, they had to add a few extra chapters to do that, but I don't know. So it's just kind of interesting about the Greeks. And then there was there's also, and I don't want to mention it, like there's a tie in the similarities, and I think I have a question on this, so I'll go between Esther and Revelation. But so some of the questions I have in here are pretty simple. So hopefully you can bring in your thoughts into the discussion on other things you might have learned and picked up. And I do have that specific question at the end, but so why did Mordecai tell the Jews to celebrate?
So they wouldn't forget it.
Right. How were the Jews instructed? Oh, the thing Purim, and again, the Pur is lots, casting of lots, and there was, I think we talked about it some, but it was the whole. That's why they have that name of Purim, about the casting of lots or rolling dice or whatever that those was that they used, because that's where they actually a lot of them talk about how God used the casting of lots to set up the timing. Because you remember Haman and his guys, they rolled the dice to see when they should initiate the
Purge.
yeah, to do that. So that was in March, and then they rolled the dice again to see when they should implement that decree. So what day it should actually happen. And as you recall, it was in March, and then on our calendar, they would not be implemented until the following February. So it gave the Jews enough time to kind of prepare themselves for their death, I guess. And so that was kind of part of God's provision or overseeing. So that's why Purim is actually has the name of lots, so that they do recall how God was involved in their salvation, if you will.
Is the 3-part celebration some kind of a reference to the Trinity?
Yeah, one of them kind of went into in the 3 days,
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, so
There are a lot of threes.
yeah, there are. How is the celebration of Purim different from most of our celebrations?
Well, it's multiple days long.
Yeah.
You drink until you can't remember your enemies from your friends.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. So, yeah.
Gifts to the poor.
Yeah. That's basically food gifts. So, recounting the story in 23, so the Jews agreed to celebrate the celebration they had begun doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hamath Agagite, the enemy of all Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy and cast the pur, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. When the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that, see, that's kind of didn't quite copy the king's attention. He issued written orders that the evil Haman had devised against the Jews should come back on his own head. So that was actually Mordecai, or the queen Esther, that
Yeah, I thought that was weird that it was recounting it kind of differently. Yeah, Mordecai wrote it for the king because the king ordered Mordecai to, use his own hand. But it is interesting that they count it a little differently.
Yeah. So therefore, these days are called Purim, from the word pur, which is lots, because everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it upon themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed at the appointed time. So yeah, if you look even in Google and even in one of my Bibles, when they open up Esther, it has a list of the Jewish feast and holidays, and that Purim is always on there. I had not heard about the Jewish the annual feast of Purim, and actually, a number of, I haven't heard, we've all heard of Rosh Hashanah and a number of the others, Passover but Purim, I don't remember ever studying or hearing about in our church calendar at all. So in recounting this, what I just read, why do you suppose the narrator chose to start with Haman's plot instead of at the beginning with Esther's rise to prominence in a foreign monarchy reminiscent of Joseph?
It's a man's world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So we've talked about this. I don't know, that the day should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, in every province, and in every city. And these days of Purim should never cease to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of them die out among their descendants.
Makes me wonder if the Holocaust changes the meaning of Esther for Jewish people, because they, so many of them were killed and all of their wealth taken and their property taken and never returned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, well, you can see that's, as all this was happening to the Jews, that's why this story just came to their mind. They celebrate it every year, but okay, when's this going to be reversed, God? Come on,
Yeah, especially for people that their lives were 20, 30, 40, 50 years after the Holocaust, but they know their families lost everything. Their families lost people and property, and it does change the way you look at things.
Yeah, so yeah, that's like a lot of things. I think maybe even sometimes we struggle with some of those same things. Well, God, you did it for them at that time. Why aren't you going to do that for us now at this time? Do you not love us like you love those people, or in that situation at that time, or
yeah,
or what did we do wrong? So yeah, so that I think that would cause a lot. I mean, I don't know whether I have some questions on it as we get in.
The other thing you think of, especially when you watch a movie like Schindler's List, you wonder what is driving these people to survive, because they were, when our troops and Russian troops walked into some of these stalags and camps, these men, they weighed 50 pounds.
Right.
And most people would give up, especially when everything else was going on, getting shot for having a book, or just getting shot for fun.
Yeah.
Which is the way Schindler's List, portrays it, because the camp leader wakes up every morning with his sharpshooter, and from his balcony just shoots people, randomly shoots people across the camp.
Wow.
Every day. And it's like, how do you keep going? And then you say, well, they were reciting this story of Esther that gave them hope.
Yeah, yeah. Then the rescue didn't come for many of them.
Yeah.
And, I think one of the reading here said at the time that 6 million Jews was a third of the world's Jewish population at the time. A third. So yeah, it's okay. So it says so Queen Esther, daughter of Abigail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes, words of goodwill and assurance to establish these days of Purim at their designated time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they established for themselves their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. So I guess I just answered that question in reading that. So how she confirmed the celebration? She wrote it down. There was some couple commentaries were talking about. I mean, they the fact that Esther is kind of unusual among the women that are highlighted as in the Bible, in that she's a prominent character in this because of what she did, and that she was a queen, and that she had these written down or decreed or had them written down for her. Whereas other than being famous for being the mother or giving birth to somebody, in the Bible, they seem to focus on that quite a bit. So
It's interesting here too, though. You know, Esther gets credit for Esther's decree, right? But then they close with Mordecai was the one who was second in rank to King Xerxes.
yeah.
So you're going, okay, there's a little bit of a nod to Esther because she's the one who has the decree. Mordecai doesn't have a decree. So it's interesting to me. It's just weird. It's kind of like giving a little bit of a nod to both of them, but ultimately closing with the fact that, well, it was Mordecai that had the power.
Yeah, so yeah, I tried to and again so I was doing this last night, and it said, well, you know, actually the Greek translation of this pulls Mordecai more up to the front, or as the head guy of all this going on, rather than it being as a partnership. And I think I don't know, I don't recall why I put any questions in here at the end about the partnership.
So it'd be interesting. Does the Greek version take out some of the comments about Esther? See, that would be really interesting. You know, adding is one thing, but yeah,
that's kind of what I wanted to look at. So that I don't know, that the one commentary said, well, the Greeks added these chapters to the book, and the emphasis is more on Mordecai, and it said so that's why the NIV bases its its translation of the book of Esther on the Hebrew, and but I just glanced at some of the other translations I have, and again, I didn't do an exhaustive study, so I couldn't immediately find one that was translated from the Greek. So why was he held in such high esteem? And we just kind of talked about that, second in rank to King Xerxes. And it says because he worked for the good of his people and spoke for the welfare of all Jews. So what new things did you learn in this study of Esther?
God's will be done.
Yeah. And they continue to comment about, you know, this Jewish book and of Esther, and nowhere is God mentioned in the book. But
yeah, I didn't realize that either. I think the other thing here is that the world will always try to destroy the Jewish people.
Yeah. Well, and God's people, I think, more generally, which would include us as Christians. So, I mean, in Genesis, I mean, it all started back in Genesis. God promised that the serpent who struck the seed of the woman would in turn be crushed itself. In the story of Esther, we see how Haman's plans to strike God's people backfired and ended in his own demise. Likewise, the cross and resurrection of Jesus, we see how the evil done to Christ was the way in which evil was overcome and defeated.
Yeah, and I'll give you one less reference to Schindler's List. The people that walked into those camps were the Americans. The Americans were, at that time especially, a country of God, right?
Right. Yes.
And so, you know, just like in Esther, where the people stood up and defeated the enemy, this country of God stood up and defended the Jewish people. So it's just amazing how many similarities there are in the two stories.
Yeah, and that whole thing, and again, the book I sent out, whatever this, well, you can't see it, but Josiah Manifesto by Jonathan Cahn. I just started it on vacation, but man, there's so many parallels between what's happening in America as us being people. We were a people of God, like at that time, and how we've kind of fallen away, much like the Jews are, and how many of the things that are written in the Old Testament have been playing out today. I mean, to the day of the month and the 50-year cycle. It just is. My mind's blowing. So I recommend. It is. I mean, yeah. So Jonathan Cahn does a good job of. I don't know. He has all the references and the footnotes, and you can look up the Bible passages. You can go to. You can Google the times and the dates, and it is. Like I said, I'm just a few pages in, and my mind is blown. My mind is blown. So.
Well, I mean, God does that. I mean, if you read the Bible and you look at all these references that point to Jesus, and that point to the fall, and point to, you know, our salvation. It is so interwoven that we even though as the more you study, you go, oh, but that all that tells me is there's 100 O's that I haven't reached yet. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean that's amazing. I mean, I think you look at that, and if, like I said, I recommend anybody gets that book, and if they read it and they think it's a bunch of BS, I'll reimburse them for the cost of the book. So it is that I mean, that's going to change maybe your perspective on things a little bit. It's just, it shows you what's going on behind the scenes, and I mean behind the scenes in the spiritual and in God's plan. So
It should blow your mind, but it also should give you comfort that God is in control.
Oh no, right. It does. Yeah. It's significant. I mean, it's like you see in the story of Esther, you know, God's not mentioned, but you can see throughout the whole book where he's working in the background, his plan for his people. And again, so I could see it, as you referenced earlier. I mean, how the Jews in the concentration camp keep thinking, well, you know, yeah, God's working. He's going to, like he did in Esther, he's going to come in and reverse this whole thing for us. But then I'm sure they had some disappointment, certainly. So again, do you feel God is still involved in human affairs as we saw in Esther, or even more obviously?
Oh, he's definitely still involved. The miracles that we see, the ability that he has to use people that don't even know him, right? That's the amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, that is so true today too. And so any other thoughts on that?
You know, I think that I'm in another Bible study where we're studying all the minor prophets. And when we keep talking about the parallelism between now and back thousands of years ago, it's true across the board. God has done that continually to draw our attention to even today, how there are similar things parallel to what was going on in those times. And he does a great job of communicating it if we are listening to what he's saying.
Right.
I just sent an article, Dwight, from the Jerusalem Post that was written back in 2018 during their festival. It says, "Reading Esther after Auschwitz." So, interesting take on. The writer refers to it as the story of Esther without a happy ending.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right.
Yeah, I'll send that out too.
It's interesting perspective. He talks about a bunch of what ifs, what if Winston Churchill was a German sympathizer and all these other, leaders, including America.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Meaning that, kind of implying that God's hand was probably still, there's other things that could have happened that would have allowed Hitler to reveal his plan across the world, right? And exterminate all the Jews.
Well, the dragging in the feet for the United States entering was a lot to do with the fact that there were a lot of German sympathizers in America and in power.
Yep.
Yeah, they're so true about that. Steve, there was a large contingent of people in England that was siding with Hitler at the time.
Well, the weird thing is, with all the espionage that the British had, with the direct experiences in the rest of Europe of the fact that the Jewish people were being gathered, their stuff was being, taken from them, and they were being put in camps, and people were being lost. Even when our troops entered the camps, the official message was, "Oh, we had no idea this was happening." And I'm kind of going, there's no way they didn't know. There's no way they didn't know.
Well,
I mean, you can say that, and that you keep saying it and saying it and saying it, and maybe you start to believe it yourself, but the reality is they do.
There's so much there's money tied into this whole thing too. I mean, people were making money off of this, and so again, why they overlooked some things just so they could continue to have those relationships. And
yeah, I mean, Switzerland is still rich because of this. And if you like going, and I do, I like going to Switzerland. It's a cool place, but it is physically isolated from Europe, and it is socially isolated from Europe. And I think it's partly because during the Second World War, they were the ones that were the banker for, convert this thing I stole from this Jewish guy into cash and hold the cash for me, because that's what they did.
Yeah.
That'll probably get us kicked off of.
No, but that's still going on today, and I don't want to get off on anyway, so I'll try and keep my comments. So again, the one of the books was talking about similarities between the book of Esther and Revelation. Can you think of any come to mind right offhand? All right, there's one quote I forget, got this highlighted. So while the message of Esther is that on that occasion when God's people faced annihilation, he rescued them and honored them. The message of the Bible is that God will sometimes rescue his people, and that sometimes he will not rescue them. And the gospel is that God did not rescue his son from dying, but did rescue him by raising him from the dead. Those Christians today whom God rescues from death praise God for his kindness. but there are many not rescued by God. However, those who face death for the sake of Christ know this faithful saying and find it both comfort and warning. Here's the trustworthy saying: if we died with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we disown him, he will also disown us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself. And that's 2 Timothy. So the preservation of God's people, the Jews, is a sign of the existence of God. And this is Frederick the Great of Prussia in 1712 to 1786, was a great ruler, but not a believer in God. He once asked his physician, "Can you give me one irrefutable proof of the existence of God?" And his physician said, "Yes, Your Majesty, the Jews." What a good answer. For the continued existence of the Jews as a distinct people without a homeland for centuries is indeed a sign of God's plan. I thought that was interesting. I think I've got, we look at these later, but I did want to read some things to think about. And again, it's small print, but I just pulled some things as I was preparing the study. So they're kind of disjointed. But the things I found interesting, Esther is a remarkable biblical history, not only for her role in the deliverance of God's people, but for the authority she achieved to write. Though she most likely used scribes to record her words, just as Haman and Mordecai had done, Esther had initiated Mordecai's promotion and bestowed his wealth. It was her authority that confirmed his previous letter. No other woman among God's people wrote with authority to confirm and establish a religious practice that still stands today. The importance of most biblical women, such as Sarah and Hannah, lies in their motherhood. Esther's importance to the covenant people is not as a mother, but as queen. Nevertheless, in chapter 10, it is Mordecai who gets the last word. When life returned to normal after the crisis, Mordecai continued to use his rank as second only to the king for the benefit of his people. When Haman had worn Xerxes' signet ring, he was effectively, though not formally, the king of the enemies of the Jews. Now Mordecai wears that same ring and is effectively, though not formally, king of the Jews. As the majority of Jews continued ever after to live in lands governed by pagan powers, Mordecai became the paradigm of a Jew who could achieve success in the pagan world and use that achievement for the protection and well-being of the Jewish people. The Jews of this diaspora continued to face the threat of death brought by changing winds of political intrigue under the Hellenistic kings. Without a king of their own, a Jewish man in high places in government was seen as an agent of God's covenant protection. Mordecai provided both a rationale and a role model for successive generations. Neither Esther nor Mordecai had the power or position alone to deliver their people. It was only as they acted in concert in power and authority that they were able to lead God's people through the crisis of death and into deliverance. Neither of them aspired to the role. Perhaps neither of them deserved it. It was thrust on them by a series of improbable circumstances largely beyond their control. Nevertheless, their unlikely partnership accomplished God's ancient promise, and the Jewish race was preserved until, in the fullness of time, God entered history through his people as the Messiah. How marvelous are God's inscrutable ways. Because the book of Esther has eschatological significance, it bestows eternal purpose to the partnership of women and men in roles other than marriage and childbearing. Moreover, it endows the laity of the church with that same eternal purpose. God has placed Christian women and men not only in marriage relationship, but in community with one another in the church. The sound marriage and family structure is essential for the well-being of both society and church, but is not the only way in which women and men may effectively relate to each other for the glory of God. Christian men are not only husbands and fathers, nor Christian women only wives and mothers. Both have a wider range of interests, talents, gifts, and calling from the Lord. And God rules not only redemptive history, but by his power, all of history serves as redemptive purposes. Redemptive history and secular history are not two separate streams of human experience, but one. Redemptive history is united to and is one with secular history. The events that define redemptive history emerge from the stream of secular history only by being so identified, interpreted through Scripture. So, any other thoughts on this passage?
In a strange way, you know, the power that Mordecai found in a foreign power, you know, above his people is similar to what Matthew and Paul did. You know, Matthew was a tax collector. He was very successful, but he wasn't successful because he was a Jew. He was successful because he was operating within the Roman,
Right.
you know, space, and some of that knowledge helped Jesus and the disciples going forward. And Paul, in the same way, you know, some of his leverage over his life was because he was a Roman citizen and had some success in the Roman world before he became to follow Jesus. It's just interesting that because they're Jews, they can't be fully in those worldly places, but they establish themselves, and that God leverages it, right? He does leverage it. So there's some similarities there, and you know, Matthew 2, of the four Gospels, only Matthew and John were of the 12, right?
Yeah.
Because Mark wasn't, and Luke wasn't.
Right.
So, you know, a lot of interesting aspects there.
No, I agree. So yeah, this is again, before we did this book, I never knew it really that it was there. So this has been informative from that perspective. And but again, it certainly figured very predominantly. If we were Jewish, I guess we would have known all about this book.
Yep, known it well, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what we're going to do next. I guess we'll wait. It'll be a surprise, but see what happens over this next week. So, and I may
Dwight, I'm going to be sending you step-by-step information on how to do this, because I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I'll give the username, password, all of that. I know last time you had the recording is not a problem. If you just look down at the bottom, it isn't there now, but there's a little circle and you just click on it. Quite honestly, you don't ever have to shut it off, because when everybody logs off, the recording stops.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So is Nehemiah the next book after this, chronologically? Because I think, isn't Nehemiah, doesn't he
It's Job, isn't it, after Esther?
yeah, but I was thinking,
Time
like,
wise,
to continue this story, I think the next
Yeah.
book
Oh.
is Nehemiah, you know,
Yeah.
is basically working for whoever the next king is, the offspring of Xerxes.
Yeah.
And they end up rebuilding the temple. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have.
I don't know how long that book is either.
Let me see.
it's not that long.
No, the chronological Bible I have goes from Esther to Ezra. But Nehemiah.
Oh, that might be right, because Ezra's part of that story. Huh.
Yeah, Nehemiah is right. I mean, I'd have to look at the dates, but yeah, he's right in that time frame. It's Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah are all kind of in there. So yeah, that might be a good thing to look at. So
just to kind of tie this back to God's, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will mention as we go into 2024, there's some significant events around Purim, and there's significant events around Passover relating to somebody's trial, or almost exactly on some of these dates. So within a day. So but we can't talk about those right now. So on the and I'll be sending out a reminder on the prayer breakfast October 3rd. So I'll be sending that out to those, and just confirm that you will be attending. There's no, you don't need any tickets to get in, but just a space at the table. So
Where is it going to be, Dwight?
it'll be at the Indiana Roof.
Okay.
I'll send out a flyer on it to that. So any updates on the prayer request? Any new? How's Dick doing?
Well, he's moved out of rehab. He Carol and Dick went through the process of selling their home, and that looks like it's going to happen. And they have moved into a facility, or a place on West 86th Street. I forget the name of it. Do you remember, Dave?
No.
Okay. It's like an independent living, but they get all their meals and so forth. But he's doing really well. He's still having a little problem with his right leg, but his mind is solid, and his arm is working much better. So I think it's just a matter of going through the course of the rehab for them. But it's
I think the beauty of this was so many prayers were answered through
correct.
this process.
Yep.
And it just happened so quickly, and it's as needed.
Right.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, miracle upon miracle.
So they got this all set up to live in that assisted care.
Right.
area.
Yep. Because they could no longer really, either of them very well, go upstairs to their bedrooms that they have upstairs, and they just needed to make a change. And during the course of all this, it just became obvious that this is something they ought to do, and everything just kind of fell in place. Like Dave mentioned, it was one miracle after another. Everything just fell in line exactly as the prayers were requested.
Wow. Okay.
He'll share the story once he's back on. He's anxious to get back on with us.
All
I'm
right.
sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So did Debbie have her surgery? Gary, I keep forgetting on the timing.
She remember, not yet. Remember when you get a surgery around here, you got to wait 2 months. Her surgery is right at the beginning of October.
Okay.
So
If it was Canada, she'd wait 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, even doctor's appointments, you think you can get right in, you can't. It makes you not want to miss them, because if you miss it, you're waiting to get back in.
Wow.
But yeah. But she's anxious. She's still using the crutches, and knees are terrible. So when you're in pain, you're in big pain. So she's saying she'll have 2 replaced knees. She'll be truly a bionic woman. I can't mess with her. When she kicks, it'll be hard.
All right. Well, we'll be praying for you then, Gary, surviving during that period of time. So
yeah, I will be. And I've already been told this. You are a caregiver, because there's a lot of things until you recover with PT and all that. So yeah, and I'll tell you, next week, because she's having the surgery, we're taking off and going to be gone. I have no idea. She's picking someplace we're going to go. So we'll be gone next week. And then the following week, I have a surgery. It's no big deal. It's an outpatient surgery. It's called Urolift on the prostrate. So when they took the stone out, they said, well, at 77, you ought to just have this done. But it's up to me. And I said, well, what the heck? Let's do it. So I'm going in. I'll go in the following after this next Thursday, the next Thursday, and then be out the same day. Friday is recovery, and I'll be up and going by Saturday and Sunday.
All right. Well, wow. Okay.
You'll be able to write your name in the snow again, Gary.
Yes, right.
Oh my gosh.
From a distance.
There you go.
Yeah.
I can stand and write it, right in the snow, clear out by the street.
Yeah, I had something similar. So that does.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
I did my research too. I talked to guys that had it done. I said, is this really worth it? Because it's elective and I'm not really having any major problems. And they said, oh my God, you can't believe how much better you're going to feel. And I went, really? So I'm doing it.
There you go. Greg, how's Anna doing?
She's doing really well. She spent this week in LA. She was the production manager of a shoot they were doing for Google. They were actually doing an advertisement of an application that they wrote for hospitals in India who have trouble providing care. And so they found a hospital in LA that had been abandoned and they got full reign to shoot it. So it was kind of cool. And she's been sending pictures and she just sounds like she's doing really well. She's heading back tomorrow to San Francisco and they're still planning on moving back to the Midwest in the end of October. So yeah, I think she's doing really well. Yeah, she's doing well.
Great. All right. Well, we did see Leah while we were gone. She's doing better, but she's just so skinny. I mean, it's just a concern to me. But it was good to see her and grandson Nathan and other daughter Hannah also. But I don't know. Her health is just not good. But just keep praying for her. So, in fact, I think through her whole life, that's the thing that's kept her alive, really. So, we're grateful for that. All right, let's spend a moment in prayer. And dearly Father, we thank you for this journey with these men in Esther. And it's just opened my eyes, I think, to a lot of things that you do in the background that we really don't understand or appreciate. But it's just great as we continue to learn and see how you care for your people, how you guide and direct our lives and the things that happen to us. So we ask for your continued blessing and prayers for those on our list. Have upcoming surgeries. We're thankful for the recovery and the way things worked out for Dick during this period for him. We ask for continued blessings on Anna and her husband as they in California and as they move back to Indiana. We just ask you to bring healing to her body and total restoration. Father, just we ask you continue to watch over our families and bring your blessings on our children, our grandchildren, for all the men and their families here. I thank you for their continued involvement and participation in this. And Father, we just lift up and cry out to you for America. Just restore our nation. We ask all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
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 Thanks, Dwight. Hey guys,
Thank you, Dwight.
I did have one thing. So I'm part of Boone County Mentor Partnership, which connects adults to young folks. And I picked up a new mentor. His name is Braden. He's 16 years old. He has been living with his grandma since he was 4 months old. They tried to get him back with his dad when he was 4 years old, and his dad beat him up.
Oh, geez. Oh.
So he's had just a life that none of us can understand, right? and I've met with him twice now. He's a good kid. His mom was a user when he was born, so he's got some of those legacy issues. But first of all, just pray for Braden and his grandma. That he's back. He's been allowed to go back to Zionsville schools. He was taken out for about a couple of years, but pray for him. And then also, I have so much respect for this group. Think about this program and what you might be able to do in a program, in this program or a program like it, that connects one of you to a young person who has lived a life that none of us, have had to, and would probably be challenged to survive. It's worth it. It gives back personally, and it obviously gives. So I just have you think about it.
Great, thanks.
Is it similar, Greg, to the Big Brothers program?
I remember Big Brothers back when I was a kid, and I had a couple of friends that were part of that program.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume it is similar.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, it's not a Christian program. Most of the mentors are Christians,
Right.
but it's a government. It's supported somewhat by government. It's mostly private donations, but we did obviously we study the kids in Boone County. We have 400 kids that don't know where they're sleeping tonight, that won't get 3 meals today. We have 1,200 kids that don't have a reliable, dependable adult in their life at all. It's 4,000 kids that don't have 2 parents, or I think that's actually where one of the parents is in prison. It's just, it's the reality of the world we're living in, right?
And that's just Boone County, right, Greg?
And that's just Boone County.
Right.
Yeah. And this is the same group that found, you remember me sharing the kid that got trafficked to LA? This is that same group,
Wow.
So.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
Sure.
So anything else? You stop the recording for a minute.
Should I cover my ears?
Just what I just explained to you how it worked, and now you're going to tell me shut it off. All right, it's going to say.